consort. What again strikes you is the silence as people just, family and others, taking in the moment.
And so begins the second part of this journey, now from London to Windsor, where she will be laid to rest later today. And as we see her coffin through the windows there, and I saw a moment ago the image of George and Charlotte looking on. There are the bells in the background here. A salute from King Charles. A solemn but beautiful moment here in London. And Victoria, when we look at this hearse, this was something Queen Elizabeth helped design herself, along with Jaguar.
It was, that's right. She had thought of every detail of this funeral. She was across all of these plans, and this state hearse formed an important part of that because, of course, we knew at some point her coffin was going to be transported by car, not just on a gun carriage, and this was specifically designed so that she could be seen, so that she could be visible. Her motto, obviously, I have to be seen to be believed. You may remember when she was brought back to Buckingham Palace earlier on this week, it was dark and the coffin, the hearse was lit, so you could see the coffin. So every eventuality thought of there right till the end.
One of our colleagues, Maggie Ruley, has seen the coffin from the very beginning to now. Every stage along the way, Maggie has seen that.
She started in Balmoral, and she'll be along the route here this afternoon. Of course, still morning back in the U.S. But a profound moment here, Robin, that Queen Elizabeth II leaving London now for the
from her and of her.
I think that's it, and I do think that is central to why the monarchy not just survived but thrived over so many decades of change, when attitudes were changing to things like deference, people becoming less deferential, but yet she formed this incredible bond with the public, and you can see the crowds lining the street now. As I was saying, so many of them will have perhaps a memory of when she came to their town, their city, and they saw her then. She always wore those bright block colours to be visible so people could spot her from a distance, and that was fundamental to how she performed her role.
And her daughter, Anne, is in the car behind the coffin yet again, as we saw earlier in the week. She has been there by her mother.
Which was the Queen's request.
Yes.
That it be Princess Anne who was at her side for this entire journey.
You can see flowers that are being thrown along the path. The majestic tolls of the bells. First time that we're really hearing the crowd.
The familiar swell of applause. It's difficult to allow the sadness to overwhelm in a moment when the Queen actually passes you by, and you can't help but to show your love.
It's understandable.
Yeah, for a leader. And it's funny, we were talking about Prince Philip and the Land Rover Defender, which is so unique to Philip and so him. But as Robin was saying, the Queen had a sense, an instinct of what the people would want and perhaps need after 70 years, and that would be the chance to see her one final time as she passed by.
Absolutely. I think that was central to these funeral plans, is mindfulness of how the public could be involved. This is a final farewell from the family, a final farewell to her formal roles, but her role as head of nation, that was a role that she always understood the importance of and really valued, and allowing people the opportunity to connect with her, to see her, tapping into. She had a sense of fun. She knew what people would enjoy. Some of the things that she did towards the end of her reign, even just a few months ago at her Platinum Jubilee celebrations, when there were so many crowds joyously celebrating her, and she gave them that fantastic Paddington Bear sketch. Right till the end, she had that sense of fun. And I think she knew that people would want to see her, would want to be part of this, and the way that the funeral has been designed has allowed so many people to come out and to line these streets and be here today, both in London and in Windsor and all along the way.
So many people were bringing Paddington Bear because they remember that moment, to the point that officials had to say, enough, enough, please don't bring any more.
That's right, they said, please, you can bring flowers, but we would request no more marmalade sandwiches.
See people with their phones out, just wanting to capture this moment. Many, as we've said, for days have been lining in certain spots because they wanted this moment, wanted to be able to capture this moment.
It's one thing actually that some members of the royal family don't understand or like, that when they walk out they see a sea of cameras. And I know the King always says, well, why don't they do that? Because surely they just want to look and see with their own eyes, to experience the history that they're watching, rather than filming it and looking back at it. So rather, being there is probably more special than looking back on your phone.
We all fall for that though now. It's just
we do.
Interesting, in the lying in state, there was no phone, so people who went in there were really experiencing this sort of very solemn personal moment, and there was no one was allowed to take a picture.
What's amazing now is that she really is leaving London now for the last time, heading west to Windsor, where she had her last happy moments really with her husband. Due to the pandemic, although it was terrible and awful what happened to so many people, she actually, as a result, was able to spend time with the Duke of Edinburgh that they really wouldn't have had. And if they hadn't been in this bubble with their most loyal staff, and they actually found a chance to spend more time together than they had probably since the beginning of their marriage.
The silver linings that we've talked about during a pandemic so challenging in most ways. I'll never honoring and celebrating the life of Prince Philip at St. George's Chapel, the Queen by herself with the mask. It was so symbolic of the moment, what the world was going through, and there again, she sat there in her dignified way and connected not only in the loss that she was experiencing, but also sitting there alone in a pandemic like everyone else around the world.
It was a heartbreaking image to see, and one of the defining images of the age, because, as you say, she understood the importance of going through what everyone else was going through. People were having funerals, there was strict numbers on how many people you could have, and it all comes down to her really understanding the importance of showing solidarity with her public. And I think that's something that she understood from the way that her parents behaved during World War II. They stayed at Buckingham Palace during the war, they didn't leave, and that was to show solidarity proximity with the public. And that was central to her.
It's funny you bring that up because she was sent to Windsor with her sister at a very young age during the war. Her parents stayed back here at Buckingham Palace. She's now going home to Windsor for the last time.
And that radio address. What was she, 14?
Yeah.
And made her first radio address to the public.
Very sweet, that was it, when she sat next to her. And my sister is here by my side.
Yes.
And it was so sweet. I mean, they're heading west now, just gone past the Albert Hall, and the Albert Hall, of course, was the memorial that was built by Queen Victoria to her husband. So they're now heading out via Kensington, and then going west to Windsor.
And we think about all the locations that have come into play since the Queen's death, and we think the fact that she died in Scotland, the fact that she died at Balmoral, has meant that we've seen this very long, slow journey right down one side of the United Kingdom, and actually that's been incredibly powerful to see, and it's something that wouldn't have happened had she died in England in a different residence. We wouldn't have seen that central moment in Scotland, her coffin at St Giles Cathedral, none of that would have happened. So it's incredibly powerful, I think, the symbolism of her at the private home in Balmoral, which she loved, coming to Edinburgh, having that farewell with the people of Scotland, and then travelling to England for this moment here that we see in London.
Yeah, she said actually, David, Robin, that she can never forget that she was crowned the Queen of the United Kingdom. And by dying, I think, in Balmoral, it added that extra element to the proceedings. And it probably set back a referendum in Scotland quite some way. So even though she's not political, it probably has made a political difference just by dying in Scotland.
Yeah. Joining us now, ABC News royalty consultant Alistair Bruce, who is also Officer of Arms to the King. And our friend, please share with us your thoughts on the day.
It's been unbelievably profound. I think the intention was not only for the nation to encircle its former queen with all the splendour and glory from the panoply of our history, and to give that noble pageantry that we do so well, but also at the heart of this event was the saluting to a very simple Christian soul as the Queen went on her journey and was commended to God at the end of a long life and an extraordinary reign.
How did she connect the crown and the church during her reign?
I think, as the Archbishop of Canterbury said, she just used the guidance of her faith as the template for her leadership. And I sensed that he was giving a really general story about leadership to all those in Westminster Abbey today by just defining how Jesus Christ had been for the Queen such a steadying guide, and that she had been a real servant leader. And the Queen has always cared greatly about her faith and the faith of all people in the United Kingdom, her realms and Commonwealth, who have many different faiths or perhaps are secular themselves. But for her, she always felt ultimately that the only place she could be a simple person was in front of her God.
So profound, actually, to hear that. And Alistair, we're looking at magnificent aerials of this final journey, and you can't help but to think that obviously this is Queen Elizabeth's final journey through the streets of London on her way to Windsor. And I'm curious for you how profound this moment is as well.
Well, there was a lovely moment in the procession from Westminster Abbey down the Mall here to Buckingham Palace when she passed the statues of her father and mother, King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. And I felt as she passed, her parents were looking at her and were saying, "We're really proud of you. You've done a great job." And she passed them in silence at the end of that role. And she then passed by Buckingham Palace, and all her staff were lined up to say goodbye. And it reminds you of the link she had with the close circle of those who supported her, followed by her family, and now she leaves her capital city. And as she went past Buckingham Palace, I couldn't help thinking that the first time she appeared on the balcony there was in 1935, when her grandfather celebrated his silver jubilee as King George V. And the last time she appeared on that balcony was only a short few weeks ago, on the 5th of June. And right between both, she has always, with impish enthusiasm, settled herself and her shoulders into whatever task came her way. And as Queen, she gave such an emblematic identity of nation and what mattered. And I think as London says goodbye to her, they have much to thank her for and much to remember her by.
Alistair, such beautiful words, almost poetic in a sense, and all of us here reacted to when you spoke of the procession going by the statues of her parents, who you imagined telling her, "We're so proud of you." And for those viewers watching back home, this procession leaving London, heading to Windsor, Alistair, perhaps you could shed some color, some light on the idea that she is now going home to her parents, if you will. She'll join her parents, she'll join her sister, Princess Margaret, and she'll join her husband of 73 years, Philip, who also has been waiting in the royal vault. It was something the two had agreed to. Whoever passed first, the other would wait. She's going home to her family.
She is. We've watched the state funeral the nation has given of its best. The armed forces have saluted in a manner that is, in its own way, both peaceful and splendid. But she now goes to her mother, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and Princess Margaret, her sister. And the family will watch as both the Duke of Edinburgh and the late Queen are placed in that crypt. And in a very moving ceremony, the King will play his part and scatter earth that comes from the four kingdoms upon the grave of his parents. And that is the end of the reign.
Extraordinarily powerful words. We're so appreciative of your time, Alistair, and your not only commitment to the royal family, but your observations, your very personal observations, sharing them with us here today. Thank you, Alistair Bruce, our royalty consultant, and of course, Officer at Arms to the King. Speaking of spreading earth, which is what she did after the death of her father at St. George's at the funeral for him. Now it will be King Charles in a very private moment later today, who will perform that solemn duty. And as Alistair so aptly put, that will be the official end of her reign. It's quite profound what we'll still watch unfold here later today.
But so glad, and I think many share this, that will be private, as it should be. That should be just for the family, and it will be.
And you were talking earlier, Victoria, about that deeply personal moment. The Queen performed for her father, and now King Charles will perform for his mother. The dirt, the pieces of earth that represent the kingdom in these final hours today.
I mean, there are just so many of these symbolic moments that we're seeing today in this service. I also think very symbolic, we've seen all of this time, the crown jewels on top of her coffin, the orb, the sceptre, the imperial state crown that she's worn so many times at the state opening of Parliament. And they will be removed for one final time. The symbols of authority, the symbols of monarchy removed. Of course, we have a new king. And that's what has become so apparent over these past few days, is this idea of for the reign that has ended, and this grief and this honouring this incredible legacy happening at the same time as the new king is being very visible, and he is instantly plunged into his duties. And I think that's one of the things that's really this visible new king. We are now in the reign of King Charles III, and that is already happening right before our eyes at the same time as we are honouring the reign that has ended.
Just so moved, Victoria, by these aerial images. There's not a spot on that route left open. People lining the route the entire way. But you mentioned what people can see inside those windows, sitting on top of the coffin, the crown, the scepter, the orb. Talk, if you will, about the role each of those three pieces of symbolism serve, obviously, in the monarchy, and how they will be taken away one final time later today in Windsor.
That's right. So all part of the crown jewels, all kept in the Tower of London when not in use, all used for the coronation. The imperial state crown also used for the state opening of Parliament. So it's a crown we have seen the Queen wear many times when she performs that official duty of reading a speech at the state opening of Parliament. It has more than 3,000 jewels in that crown. All of these artifacts, of course, very difficult to put a price on, priceless, the historical significance that they have.
And the weight of that crown, the literal weight of it, we mentioned in the very early morning hours for people back home in the States. But the Queen joked in a documentary about the crown. She said, you have to be very careful. She said, it's a good thing I have a similar sized head to my dad. But she talked about giving speeches, at least early on. I know in her later years they were careful about her wearing it because it was so heavy. But she said you'd have to hold the speech up so that when you lean forward, the crown wouldn't fall off of your head. But it's 2.5 pounds of jewels.
Exactly, and that was a wonderful documentary. And she was actually talking to Alistair, who we were just talking to a moment ago, who was having that conversation with her about the crown jewels. And it was amazing to see her reach out and touch that precious crown, that hugely heavy, incredible piece of history there. But she did wear it for the state opening of Parliament until very recently, when she started to wear the much lighter crown known as the diamond diadem instead, simply because of the weight in her advancing years. The orb is a symbol of the sovereign's power in the Christian world, which actually is very apt considering the conversations we've been having this morning about her faith and that beautiful, poignant religious service that we have just seen. And the scepter, a symbol of power, governance.
And we'll see all of those jewels as crown jewels again for the coronation of King Charles. What do we know at this point about the coronation, when it could be, when the world should expect to see that unfold?
We will see them in use once again when he has a coronation. At the moment, there is no announcement or time set for the coronation. The Queen's coronation was around 14 months after her accession. Possibly looking at around a year. I think there's something that they will get to, obviously, once this process is finished. The crown that the sovereign is crowned with is called the St. Edward's crown, and that's only used for the moment of crowning, and then it's replaced with the imperial state crown that we see today at the end of the ceremony.
Because when she left the Abbey here, of her coronation, it was only until the end of the ceremony
which is difficult to line the route. They've gone out on the A4, which is the original road many years ago before they built the motorway, because that's where the people will be. So they can see one last glimpse of them on it, lining the streets all the way out towards Windsor, and via the areas where there are communities, where there are houses and where people can come and see her. If she'd gone the route that perhaps the Duke of Edinburgh would have said, go that way, it's quicker. But the fact is they've done this on purpose so that everyone can see